We love questions from the audience, so you can start commenting your questions now, or you can also add them as we go. I'll be right back on to welcome our guests to the show. Thanks for meeting us for coffee.
Sometimes coordinating multiple loads, clients, emails, and accounts becomes confusing and tedious. Introducing TIE TMS, the first all-in-one tool that helps you optimize your freight broker processes. You can send and receive quotes, review the shipment status, and keep control of your invoices all from one single screen. It's easy to manage and utilizes the best integrations. Don't take our word for it, our customers are raving about TIE. With TIE, you can improve your productivity by 75%. Go to tiesoftware.com and get a free demo now.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this morning. This is episode 45 of the Meet Me for Coffee podcast. And if you can't stay for the full episode today or you have to be in and out, that's okay. We do stream this on all podcast streaming platforms, so you can always listen back to it. It does also stay here on LinkedIn, so you can just come back here on the LinkedIn event anytime or to YouTube as well and watch the video. Today, I will have on my guest, Mr. Brett Suma, but real quick, a couple of announcements before we get started. One is that Manifest is already almost here, and it always seems to sneak up on me because the year just goes by so fast. But I remember having a debrief with the Manifest team just a couple months after the show ended last year and starting to plan for this year. And now somehow we're already almost here. So actually, we're going to have the opportunity to answer all of your questions about Manifest. I know going to a new conference seems kind of risky, right? Because we invest in that experience and we want to know what the ROI is, if it's going to be the right fit for us. And so if that's something that you guys have questions about, or you're not sure if you should be there, if you should not, or maybe who from your team should be there, then this is a great opportunity to help you guys make those decisions. On this Thursday over lunch, so 12 Central, I have on Pam Simon from Connective, who puts together Manifest. And we're just going to be talking through what's on the agenda, what's going on, what people can expect, answer any questions you guys have. and she'll kind of give her 2 cents on who she's seen have success at the show before, the people that continue to come back year after year, and things like that. So it's going to be a lot of fun. In the comments of this show, as well as our other shows that are coming up, we have a link that you can use to register for Manifest. The link automatically applies a discount of $200 off of your registration. So be sure to check that out if you're interested in attending Manifest. I think that's it for this morning's announcements. I'm going to go ahead and bring on Brett. Brett, it is a pleasure to have you here on the podcast this morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Samantha.
Awesome. Yes, thank you for being here. Loadsmith has been in the news quite a bit here lately, and we actually had connected prior to these announcements, and I was excited to have you on to talk about some things regardless. But just because there's been some recent headlines, I wanted to give you the opportunity to, one, introduce yourself, introduce Loadsmith, and then also just maybe kind of let us know what exactly is going on so that we can get those questions answered real quick, and then we'll also jump into some other fun conversations today.
Yeah, we have been in the news and all exciting things from our announcement last week of Loadsmith Holding Corporation, which is our parent corporation, divesting Loadsmith Freight Brokerage to Freightvana, who is a competitor of ours, but I would say more of a comparator in the space. And we've known the leadership team there and many of their team for, well over a decade. And so it was a natural fit for us as we looked for an acquiring partner for the freight brokerage asset of Loadsmith Holding Corp. And so that has been an interesting journey and a fun journey, just in terms of going through a divestiture and really trying to merge those two businesses into a much larger combined entity on the freight brokerage side, and a real significant player in the power only freight brokerage side. And in fact, I think when you look at the two businesses on their own, being pure play power only freight brokerages, combining them and consolidating them into one platform made a lot of sense for our shippers, made a lot of sense for our employees and carriers, as well as asset utilization. I also think there's an element of best practices that can be learned from each business. So we're really excited about that. And I'll have continued involvement as an advisor to Freightvana as they continue to scale their business, while Loadsmith Holding Corporation, focuses on some of our other business lines. And we have exciting things that we will be announcing with those businesses as time goes on. But right now, really just sitting with this most recent news, and just excited for what's to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, congratulations on the announcement. I think both Loadsmith and Freightvana have earned really strong brands in the space. And so it's always exciting to see two great companies come together. Before we move on past freight brokerage, I want to talk about it a little bit because it's the space that I know and love very well. So and to be clear, my understanding is that you guys are divesting the freight brokerage business along with the power only so those trailer units to Freightvana. But that's all been a part of your business, at least this business segment, since 2019-ish, I think. And so I'd just kind of like to get your thoughts on what has been one of the most unprecedented freight markets, I guess, is how people are describing it throughout the 2019 to 2024 market cycle. We saw some really high highs and some really low lows and a little bit of everything mixed in there in between. So would love to get your thoughts on what that experience was like in growing a freight brokerage throughout that market cycle. And I know you've been in the industry as well for quite a while. So like before that, you kind of have some context, I guess, to some of us who have this more recency bias of only knowing the last 4 or 5 years. So would love your high level thoughts on where the freight market stands, what's happened, and what some takeaways were for you, or maybe some things that proved true in the last 5 years that have always been true too.
I think that's a great question. And thanks for aging me. But
Not at all.
The reality of the freight market that we have just experienced, and I say experienced because I really believe that we're totally past it, is that it is an exaggeration of a normal freight market.
Yeah.
And so in my career, if you looked back, I would say that like the 2008 freight market was perhaps even more challenging than the 23, 24 freight market has been, from an asset owner perspective. I think that the 2008 freight market would not have been as materially difficult on freight brokerage specifically, because when you look at the overall market share of the freight that was captured by freight brokers in the 2020-21 time period, and then the retraction from that back to reallocation and alignment with asset providers. So I think that when you look at like the revenue growth that companies experienced in 2020-21, which was a lot of increased market share due to shippers needing to find additional capacity, and then rate escalation as well. And so some of those revenue numbers are vastly overstated. And then the precipitous fall is felt like even further. And so what you've had, volume is not terribly lower than it was, but so you had a fall in volume, then you had a reallocation of freight spend to asset realignment, and then rates fell as well. So if you're a freight broker, the market has seemed drastically worse than it would have felt to you probably in 2008, or some of the other freight markets that were of particularly deep depth. But I believe now that we're in this normalized freight market where the markets are just going to continue to work as they normally do. I think that we're well past like the bottom, and I think shippers are starting to recognize that, and we're at a point of equilibrium, and freight markets will normalize and act like they have previously. But the reality of it is that if you started a freight brokerage in 2019, like we did, it was definitely a roller coaster in terms of scaling and how fast we scaled and what that meant from scaling technology and scaling employees and training and developing. In the earlier days for us, it was very difficult because we couldn't have anybody to the office, so we literally are hiring people in 2020 when they're we're like meeting them in a parking lot to give them their laptop. And like, that's the first time we saw them. And then they go home and work from home, and we're trying to train from home. So that scaling in 2020 was very, very interesting and difficult. And, it was just one of those, I think, once in a lifetime market anomalies that we won't see again. You go back and look at it, and just when you thought that things were normalizing, you had Omicron. And so then there was like another spike. And then just as when you thought, and previous to that, just when you thought things were normalizing, you had winter storm. And so, it was unprecedented time. And I just don't think it was worse than 2008, just from a general being there and understanding what was happening in freight in 2008. That was a very difficult time.
Yeah, I think that when you look back at the initial recession that we had at the onset of the pandemic, it was very short-lived. I mean, it did really put some people out of business very quickly, but I have to imagine they were in very unhealthy positions already. And then we had 2 years of amazing growth. And so there was, I would imagine a difference between 2008 versus this is like how much money there was to be made and how much cash was present in the market during the 21, really more probably 21, 22 years. So awesome. Thanks for sharing those insights. What do you think? I mean, I know that you guys are divesting this side. There were a couple things come to mind to me. There were some companies that came up during this time in the freight brokerage space that didn't necessarily succeed, I guess I would say, in the brokerage space, but specifically like freight tech brokerage model, and have made some changes since. What are your thoughts kind of on why that might have been, or what didn't work, I guess, necessarily. And I don't want to just like pick on, I know a lot of people have talked about Convoy and we've said that, but I think that there were a lot of brokerages that in one way or another started in the last 4 years and thought they were going to do something very different, something very unique, and it was going to make them astronomically more successful in some way, shape, or form. What do you think about just brokerage in general? Like, what is the future of freight brokerage? Is it changing? Is it evolving? And what might that look like in the future? Because I mean, you guys, sorry, one more thing. You guys came in and did something very different too, because I know that while Loadsmith and Freightvana both have this power only model, that's not necessarily common. It's more unique and it's more progressive. So you guys followed a similar path. And what was kind of the reasoning for that? And what do you think the future is for different types of freight brokerage models?
Well, you kind of asked me 3 questions there.
I know. I'm so sorry.
I'm going to try to answer them succinctly. I think when you look at the entrance that you talked about that came in from a freight tech perspective, specifically freight tech, like trying to create, let's just call it marketplaces or, some kind of more digitally connected freight brokerage, right? I think that some of the time, and I'm not speaking for any of these companies because I don't know what happened with them specifically, but I think that if you start with too much money, so from a capital raise, then you try to bite off more than probably necessary for day one, meaning you're trying to solve a multitude of problems and create this super comprehensive platform, instead of being really focused on one thing and being the best at that one thing. And I think that happens often in tech startups, specifically that are very well funded in the beginning, is that they can try too much too soon because they have the capital to do so.
Right.
And so I think that is something that can affect any tech startup, not specific to freight. So I think that's what you saw with some. If you looked, they had these multiple channels in their business that they were trying to innovate and develop. And so I think that can happen. I think the next thing in terms of what's the future for freight brokerage is that I think that you're still going to, I think consolidation is a good thing. I think that consolidation is a beneficial thing for everybody in the industry. I think consolidation is better for the independent owner operator. I think it's better for the carrier. It just creates a more healthy economic, if you will. Earlier, when I mentioned that we're moving in this more normal, freight cycle where the ratio of spend has been reallocated to asset providers, that doesn't mean that the freight is at a healthy economic level for those asset providers. And in fact, what you're starting to see is shippers are giving rate increases, calling asset providers and offering rate increases as a preemptive strike to what could happen in 2025. And so I think that shippers recognize that rates are probably a little unhealthy in the current environment for transactions to work. So I think consolidation will continue to be important. I think that data is going to create a little bit more of a struggle in terms of how we're operating freight and the availability of data and the real timeliness of that data regarding rate structures, right? Shippers knowing what loads are being covered for, carriers knowing what loads are trading for. I think the funny thing about the whole rate transparency thing is that while we may not know the specifics, like currently the specifics of an individual margin on every single transaction that's done, we have an aggregated view of that. And so if you called, if you blasted out a quote for, let's just say Ontario to Phoenix, you're going to get a very, very consistent within a margin of error, probably within one standard deviation, 2 at the very most, of rate return, right? Yeah. And so everybody knows what that rate is because everybody knows what the carrier pay is going to be. And so this concept of we need to be more transparent with rates is that everybody already knows what it is. If you look, everything's been regressing to the mean because without volatility, everybody really price becomes the equilibrium. And so everybody really knows what the rates are. that lack of volatility is what's created the unhealthy rate structure that exists currently. And so you see volatility happen in our businesses, but it's a lane by lane, market by market volatility. It's not a network wide volatility. And so, brokerages that are on the forefront of technology are going to be able to compete and capture market share from shippers, because shippers are requiring more and more and more from technology integrations. When we were scaling our business at Loadsmith on the brokerage side, we always talked that we needed to have multi-levels of integrations. Well, that was like, the account manager working with the regional transportation manager, the sales person having, a relationship with the decision maker, probably a relationship with myself at some level in the organization. But there was always the technological integration, right? We always wanted to be a technological trading partner. Shippers are going to require that more and more. And so I think that the future of freight brokerage is there needs to be more consolidation. And we just need to be able to move forward and accept that data exists, and that we shouldn't be working as two forces that are opposing one another, right? Like, we have to find ways to collaborate with each other, because I just don't think that you're going to see another trucking organization scale the way that the trucking companies did in the 1990s. And early 2000s. I don't see a trucking company out there that's like starting today saying, I'm going to scale to 5,000 trucks. And even those 5,000 truck carriers are finding ways to leverage brokerages and leverage power only and leverage third-party carrier capacity, because really that's what the future is going to be. I always think it's interesting when you talk about scaling and how do we add capacity into the network. And if you were working at, let's just pick a fictitious trucking company that had 5,000 trucks now, and that trucking company wanted to double their revenue over the course of the next 5 years, how would they do that? Could they really add 5,000 trucks? Could they really add the requisite 15,000 trailers to do that? Just from a capital perspective, let's say that they could. Could they hire the drivers? Could they build the infrastructure to support those drivers? I don't think that that's going to happen. I do think, though, that it's easy for a trucking company that operates 5 trucks to scale to 10, to scale to 20. And so that's where I still think that you're going to see that small segment carrier continue to grow. And what's unique is the environment that we're in with, you mentioned, our differentiation strategy is similar to Freightvana's, which is power only. I'm a firm believer in that. We're building technologies around that. That's kind of our continued, focus as we divest the brokerage, is around trailer technology and around power only freight brokerage. So I think that is the segment that's going to continue to expand and grow. I think that you're going to see, some that operate in that space that don't know how to control their equipment and don't know how to, manage through damage and unauthorized use and those types of things, struggle. But those that are on the forefront of technology and creating, technology products into the trailers and into the trailer management, I think will do really well in the space.
Awesome. You did great. You remembered all 3 of those topics. So it was almost a year ago now. I had a podcast panel, and we're actually about to kind of repeat it here in January, but it was Ken Adamo, Jason Miller, and Chris Pickett. And we were talking about how I had initially thought that the availability of data meant that things should be a little bit smoother. Like, we should all kind of understand where we're at. Seasonality should be lessened. The severity of it shouldn't really, be as significant. And they kind of helped me maybe reconsider that. And they said that, hey, actually, with the availability of data, the market can move faster and react faster. More or less real time, maybe not necessarily real time, but like with very quick turnaround time. So when, like you said, a certain lane or a certain metro or something is impacted, we can see the result of that almost in real time. And so they actually said that what it could do is create more volatility, but shorter lived volatility, because in the same way that we see it contract, we also see it loosen just as fast. So I think that's interesting to think about. And something that you brought up is that the kind of way our market behaves, and even just the seasonalities and micro market shifts they're not really, it's not hard to know about. Like, as to your point, we see that we would see the same rate responses from almost everyone in that market, whether they've been in it for 20 years or 2 days, coming back. So, and then on the freight brokerage side, or on that tech side, specifically, you talked about like brokerages just needing to become more tech enabled. And I really liked what you said about the opportunity for smaller carriers to grow into more of a mid-sized carrier, because I think that creates such a positive outlook for the future of even freight brokerage. Because I think that that's really where brokers can shine, is by finding all of these mid-sized carriers that can do more than just that one-off load from a spot market, and kind of partner up with them to create some type of consistencies and carrier reutilizations, and then provide that to these shippers so that they're leveraging these mid-sized carriers, but in a way that's more efficient than what I think brokers have historically done out of necessity with the smaller fleets. Okay. I want to move on to quickly talk about kind of just technology. You guys are now going to be very focused on technology that services the freight brokerage space, transportation space. And as you go into that, we've learned a lot. I think there's been a lot going on in the last, there's been a lot going on in the last 10, 15, 20 years in technology, but specifically in freight, I feel like we've seen a lot happen just in the last 5 years or so. And you guys have been building technology in this environment too. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you've learned creating technology in the freight market over the last 5-6 years, and how you kind of see the lessons you've already learned and where the market sits today as like your takeaways from that, I guess, as you start planning for your future.
Yeah, obviously a lot's changed. And what I would say is that it really started, I would say, accelerating probably around the 2015 time period. And I would say, so if you say, well, the last 10 years, what has happened is that there's been a lot of foundational technologies that have been coming to market. And I call them foundational technologies because, in my opinion, there's transformational technologies that are going to be coming to market as in the next 10 years. That are predicated on that foundation being laid. Visibility would be one. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now the irony in visibility is that if you were sitting in my seat in 2016, 2017 time period, and the ELD mandate was being talked about, and then subsequently you had Forkites and Project 44 say that's an opportunity for us to provide visibility. And so that's an interesting foundational technology, right? Visibility, I don't believe, is a transformational technology. I think it's foundational. And so they utilized a government mandate on something to their advantage to come to market with a product that lays the foundation for the future of other things and other more transformational technologies. And so I think that when you look at the technologies that have come to market over the course of the last 10 years, there's been a lot of building on those types of things. And I think that there'll be continual building on top of those foundations. Visibility would be one of the ones that is one of the bedrock foundational technologies.
Yeah.
And so as you go forward and people start thinking about how do we build, I'm a big proponent of freight aggregation as an example. And so when you talked about like small or mid-tier carriers growing, freight aggregation really is like how they're going to be able to leverage, broker customer relationships and not being tied to one brokerage, but maybe being tied to an aggregated view of that, as well as like an aggregated view of power only availability. right? And so, and in fact, I have a very close friend of mine that wants to start a trucking company, and I'm just imploring him to not buy trailers. So there's no reason for you to buy trailers, because literally you can go market to market one way, with a plethora of different power only options behind, trailer options behind you. And so I think that we're in for a transformation, and I think that AI is obviously going to be the piece that is the big catalyst there. And so everything that we're doing is like, how do we involve AI into what we're doing from a technology perspective? And
I was
and
going to
when
bring it
you
up if you didn't.
Okay, yeah. So, AI is heavily involved in
Yeah.
the things that we're working on. And how do you appropriately use AI
Sure.
and not just say, well, we're using AI, but what are you building into it that actually is artificial? And then, and then beyond that, how do you still recognize that that there's a human element to this, right?
Sure.
And there always will be a human element, even though I'm like one of the biggest, flag wavers of autonomous. There will always be a human element to what we're doing. And so when we think about these transformational technologies that are coming and very AI driven, we're really talking about how do we build that technology into trailer assets? How do we build it into tractor assets? How do we create environments of mass efficiency, and what I always call the elasticity of supply?
Mhm.
And so when you were talking about your panel that you had with those three individuals, that elasticity of supply, I think, is a very very forward-looking concept. And what I mean by that is that the autonomous future allows us to have elasticity of supply in any freight lane that we want in the United States, because it does, in a way, create an environment where we can add or subtract capacity on demand and reallocate capacity on demand, because you don't have the same constraints from a human element of hours of service and or locations and domicile. And so your ability to maneuver equipment and capacity in your network changes. It's very dynamic, and so you're allowed to. So you create a much smoother, overall supply and demand equilibrium because of that. So I think that great work by some people from a foundational perspective, and then I think that others are going to take that work and create transformational technologies. And look, there's things that I see from an autonomous future perspective or from a trailer technology perspective, that I really think that by bringing those things together and then building it in a way that serves the current construct that exists from a shipper. Let's face it, a shipper dominated business. And how do we serve shippers better with those technologies? It's an exciting time. And I think that between now and 2035, it's crazy to think that we're in 2025. So between now and 2035, that transformation is going to continue to filter into the network. And then I think that you're going to really look and say, okay, how have we evolved in let's just say from the year 2000 to the year 2050? How did the entire industry evolve? And looking up 25 years from now and saying, well, we were a major part of that, because and look, the Four Kites and the Project 44s, huge in terms of being involved in building that. But then I think you're going to see new people come in and build even more exciting products.
Yeah. I think I was going to bring up AI. I'm glad you did, because I think that a couple of things. I think there's a challenge that's going to present itself, because just like we talked about how we want to see these smaller carriers maybe grow, we want to see a consolidation in the brokerage space. There's a lot of things that would be good things to happen, in your opinion and mine as well. But I also actually just this morning, Ken from DAT posted data that they've observed on how many times a carrier uses a broker or a broker utilizes a carrier. And it's depressing, in my opinion. Like, it's so transactional, it's so transient. It's just like, and that's how a majority of our business is operating right now. And I think that that's inefficient. And then that there's a lot of opportunity to improve in that regard. And I think that's something we've done, to your point about data, is we've done a really good job in the last 10 years of providing technological tools and platforms that say, here is the data, here is what's happening, or here's what happened recently or is happening right at this moment, but it's stopped right there. And I think that what AI is going to allow us to do is to start saying, here's what's happening, here are some things to do about it. Here, if you do this, X will happen. If you do this, Y might happen. Here's a suggested best next step. And then also, I think we're going to get to a point where we could be like, hey, if you do this, this might cause this problem. Here's how we could prevent that. So I feel like we have a lot of data, but it is literally just that. It is just data that we can look and analyze his like past and say, how do we try to make better decisions? But I think we could get to a point where everything's a little bit more like the data is actually coming with actionable next steps that allows for immediate improvement. And that's something that I'm hoping to see with the progression of AI and technology. And I think that something else I'd like to put out there is that you mentioned the human element, and that is so important to me in this industry. I think there's so much to be said about relationships between brokers and carriers and brokers and shippers and their providers. But I've heard a lot, especially like increasingly from the carrier side, in frustration that all of these new tools and technologies and apps and softwares are actually like removing them further from the human element of their broker partners. And they're feeling more and more frustrated by the amount of technology, and then also just the sheer number of things to navigate, like this app, that app, this. And I think, again, I'll say one last thing about these bigger visibility platforms being a great one is a broker can say, okay, you know, one of these platforms is going to give me tracking access, and I am therefore going to mandate that all of my carriers who work with me use this app, regardless of whether or not that app is the easiest or best or most efficient solution for those carriers. And so we also got to a point where there's actually friction, because it's like, what works best for me has to work best for you. And that's just not the case in our industry because of how different everyone is. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity that AI and technology is going to bring into this space. And I think the challenge is going to be balancing that with relationships and considering everyone's viewpoint, because there's so many, I don't want to say like cooks in the kitchen here, but just to move a load from point A to point B, we have, you know, several entities involved. And so it's how do we determine the best way forward for everyone? And I think that's introducing the idea of increased flexibility and technology that can kind of move fluidly across different scenarios instead of being very rigid.
Yeah. I saw the Ken Adamo post this morning, and there's a lot to unpack there though.
Yeah.
You know, I'll tell you that in November, Loadsmith covered 92% of our loads with existing carriers in our network.
Absolutely.
Now, here's what I'll tell you is that 90% of Loadsmith's freight is contractual.
Sure.
We own the lane. And so we are covering that load every single day, every single week, 52 weeks a year. And so that is what really drives, you know, carrier reuse rate, is like the consistency.
Yeah.
I think that when you look at freight brokers in general, and we have a pretty, you know, concentrated, you know, customer mix, and most of our shippers are going to be large shippers.
Mm-hmm.
Where when you're talking about like, you know, a tier 3, you know, level freight broker who's making 100 phone calls a day to onboard a customer to ship one load, you are going to have to go into the, you know, first time carrier to haul the load, you know, perspective. I think that there's, you know, I think that freight aggregation can help solve that. Right. And so if you only have one load from a customer from point A to point B, go and find 10 more customers that ship in that same lane. And then you can reuse the carrier, different logo customer every single day, but you can reuse that carrier over and over again. So I think there's things that you can do in terms of like capturing that capacity. Generally speaking, capacity capture is all related to network design. And so if you're able to design an articulate freight network, then your carrier reuse rate will be really high. We often talk about like, we want the least amount of friction freight that we possibly can, that we can have. And friction means how easily are we able to cover it with a carrier that we know and trust, that's going to pick up and deliver on time. And so those are the things that we look for. Like I always use this example as an OD pairing that we just would never book. We would never book a load from Albuquerque, New Mexico to Billings, Montana. We just never would do it. And it would not matter the shipper's willingness to pay. It just is too much friction for our business in terms of the carrier that we would have to source for that. And so that doesn't mean that there's.
I hate to say that that's like a progressive view, like way of running a brokerage, because I actually know a lot of the brokers who operate like that, and I like to hang out with those people because those are good people, right? Like those are the brokerages that I get excited about, and I've been long saying that that's like the future of brokerage is to be more intentional and have a market design. Just because you could potentially find a truck in any market and move it to any market does not by any means mean that you should. And like you just said, and I think that when you talk to a lot of people and you've like, I've been in the industry since 2019. And to be honest, starting in like 2021, I started getting involved with companies that were creating intentional market designs. So that seems to me to be like that's what I know. That's what I always talk about. That's what I always have existed in. And then I get like, I say disappointed about his post because I recognize how much of the industry is not that way. But we have more people doing it that way than we ever did before, I think. But there's just so much progress still to be made in that market design space. And it's really going to be kind of like that shift of responsibility almost, because we expect carriers to have a set market, a plan. What are your lanes of service? Where are you strongest? What do you want to run based on your equipment types, your driver's preferences, things like that. And I think that we can start shifting a similar responsibility to the broker to say, well, if you want to start reutilizing carriers who have these plans, then you need to also have consistent plans around what markets that you want to serve to attract those carriers in. And that's when I think we start seeing a lot of this cheesy, but like harmony in the marketplace, because you start to align your goals with the goals of these mid-sized fleets. And so then you guys are actually able to work together. And that's when the real value of a broker, in my opinion, to a carrier comes in, because now you're adding these value added services. Like you're handling the EDI integrations, you're building all the loads, you're doing the account management, you're running the quarterly business reports, like you're providing the data and the tracking and the visibility. And that is like that, all of that technology that continues to get added on and layered in is where brokers can really shine and like add that value to a carrier who, to be honest, just wants to operate and operate really well. They want to do their part. They want to be really good at operating, and they want to make their customer happy and the end customer happy. But if we can align those carrier networks with those broker networks, and you can find the right partners, which it sounds like that's what Loadsmith did, right? And that's what Freightvana has been working on. Then like that's the future of brokerage, in my opinion, that we should be striving for. And then all of this good, like really fun AI and tech stuff gets to continue to come out and make it easier, to do that and aid in those efforts. So thank you for bringing all of that up, because that's something I really like to talk about. Okay. If anybody has any questions, you better get them in now. Somebody did ask about a link to a show, and I'll get that in the comments after the show. Brett, I really enjoyed talking about these things. You got me excited there about a couple things at the end. But if anybody is like, I'd like to kind of hear a little bit more about something that you talked about, or has any questions about Loadsmith, where you guys are going, what's happening with Freightvana, anything like that, is there a good place that they could reach out to get in touch?
Yeah, anybody can email me. My email address is super simple. It's just brett@loadsmith.com. So
awesome.
Yeah.
And then you are also fairly active on LinkedIn. So if anyone wants to go give him a follow or connect with him there, you can keep up with what Brett and Loadsmith have going on as well through LinkedIn. So that is everything I have time for today. Brett, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your thoughts. I'm glad we finally got to make this happen. I've been talking about it for a little while, and I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having me, Samantha.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, that is all for episode 45 of the Meet Me for Coffee podcast. I will see you guys on Thursday if you're able to attend. I will be having a conversation with Pam Simon again about Manifest. I'll put the link to that show in the comments section of this show on LinkedIn if you want to come back and find it. Thanks, everyone.